The alarm did not wail, it screamed. I was thrown against the wall of the cargo corridor before I even understood what had happened, my shoulder cracking into a support beam hard enough to steal the air from my lungs. Red light pulsed down the length of the hallway, painting everything the color of a warning nobody wanted to hear. Somewhere above me, a voice I recognized as Captain Mira Doss cut through the chaos on the ship-wide comm. Containment breach, Deck 4. I repeat, containment breach, Deck 4. This is not a drill. Lock down every corridor between cargo and crew quarters. My name is Ethan Marsh. I was a systems engineer on the Halcyon Reach, a research and transport vessel with a crew of 11, only 3 of us human. I had signed on for the pay and the chance to see parts of the galaxy no one back home would ever believe existed. I had not signed on for this. I pressed my back against the wall and tried to steady my breathing. Down the corridor, through a reinforced window meant for observation, I saw the containment chamber. The thick alloy door that was supposed to be sealed shut hung open at an angle, torn from its hinges like it was made of paper instead of ship-grade steel. The cage inside was empty. Talon Reish, our science officer, came skidding around the corner a moment later, feathers along her neck raised stiff with alarm. The Corvain were not built for panic. Their whole species prided itself on calm, but there was nothing calm in her voice now. "It is out," she said. "The Vren is loose on the ship." I felt my stomach drop somewhere near my boots. I had heard the name before, whispered in the mess hall like something you were not supposed to say too loudly. The Vren was not just an animal. It was a legend, and legends do not usually get whispered about kindly. It was the reason entire trade routes near the planet Kessa Prime had been abandoned decades ago. It was the reason no salvage crew, no matter how well paid, would set foot on that world without a full military escort. We had one specimen aboard, sedated, meant for a research station 3 systems away, a live sample requested by scientists who apparently valued curiosity over caution. Now it was awake, and it was somewhere on our ship. "How?" I managed to say. My voice came out smaller than I wanted. "The storm," Talon said. "The turbulence must have cracked the containment seal. We were not supposed to hit weather this deep in transit." Draven Cole arrived next, our security chief, a broad-shouldered Ashkar with plated skin the color of wet stone. He was already loading a stun rifle, though I noticed his hands were not quite steady either, and Draven Cole was not a person who shook. "Standard rounds will not slow it down," he said, more to himself than to us. "Nothing does, not for more than a few seconds." "Then what does?" I asked. He looked at me the way you look at someone who has asked a question with no good answer. "Nothing has ever needed to find out," he said. "Every recorded encounter with a Vren ends the same way. It bites once. Whatever it bites does not get back up." I wanted to ask more, but the lights along the corridor flickered, and somewhere deeper in the ship, something heavy hit the floor. Not a stumble, a controlled, deliberate step, the kind an animal takes when it already knows exactly where its prey is standing. "Move," Draven Cole said, and we ran. We reached the crew quarters level and sealed the bulkhead behind us, though sealed felt like too strong a word for a door that had already failed once tonight. Captain Doss met us there, her face pale under the emergency lighting, a datapad clutched in one hand showing a rough map of the ship, with a single red marker crawling steadily upward through the decks. "It is tracking something," she said, "or someone." "Body heat," Talon said quietly. "Vren hunt by heat signature first, scent second. It will follow whichever crew member is nearest." I did not like the way everyone in that room went very quiet after she said that. "How dangerous are we actually talking?" I asked, because somebody had to, and apparently it was going to be me. Talon hesitated before answering, which somehow made it worse. "The venom in a single bite can shut down a nervous system in under 2 minutes, she said. "There is no antivenom. No species we know of has ever produced one, because no species we know of has ever survived long enough to study what is needed. It does not matter what you are, human, Ashkar, Corvain, the result has always been the same." I thought about my mother back on Earth, who still believed I worked a boring supply route between mining colonies. I thought about how she would never actually believe this story, even if I lived to tell her. "Then we do not let it get close to anyone," Captain Doss said, and there was a firmness in her voice that steadied the room, even if only a little. "Draven, seal every possible route it could take toward the bridge. Talon, get me eyes on every internal camera we have left. Ethan. Yes, Captain. You know these ventilation systems better than anyone on this ship. I need you to shut down every duct connecting Deck 4 to Deck 5. If it finds another way up through the walls instead of the halls, we lose whatever advantage we have. My mouth went dry, but I nodded anyway. It was better than standing still. Understood. Before I left, Captain Doss caught my arm for a brief second, her grip firmer than I expected from someone who looked as shaken as she did. If you see it, she said, you do not try to be brave. You run, and you call this channel the moment you are clear. Do you understand me? I understand, I said, though I was not sure at the time whether I truly believed I would be capable of following that instruction if the moment actually arrived. I grabbed a toolkit and a portable light and moved toward the maintenance access near the far end of the corridor, my footsteps sounding far too loud in my own ears. The lights along this stretch of the ship had already dimmed to conserve power for the sealed sections further ahead, leaving long stretches of shadow between each dull amber fixture. I found myself counting them as I walked, an old habit from childhood, counting streetlights on the way home in the dark, as though counting made the distance shorter or the dark less complete. Somewhere behind a bulkhead to my right, I heard Talon's voice, muffled and distant, relaying camera feeds to the bridge. I could not make out the words, only the tension carried in her tone, rising and falling, as she tracked something moving across a grid of screens I could not see. A door hissed open ahead of me, and I nearly dropped the toolkit before realizing it was only the environmental system cycling air through the corridor, a routine function that had never once startled me before tonight. My hands were shaking. I noticed it distantly, the way you notice something happening to somebody else, and forced myself to keep moving anyway. Behind me, I heard Draven Cole murmur something to Talon, low enough that he probably thought I would not catch it. The human should not go alone. He knows the ducks better than either of us, Talon answered. And frankly, if it does find him first, there is nothing either of us could do that would change the outcome. I tried not to let that settle into my chest the way it wanted to. I kept walking. The maintenance shaft was narrow, lit only by the beam of my handheld light, and every clang of metal under my boots sounded like it could give away exactly where I was. I worked fast, disconnecting power relays, manually sealing valve after valve, watching a soft blue indicator light shift to red each time I finished one, meaning one less path for something enormous and lethal to slip through unseen. 3 ducks down. 4 to go. That was when I heard it breathe. Not loud, not dramatic, just a slow, deliberate exhale from somewhere behind the grating to my left, close enough that I felt the faint warmth of it against my skin. I froze completely, my light trembling in my hand, and for the first time since the alarm had gone off, I understood with total clarity that whatever the Vren was, it had already found exactly what Talon said it would find. The nearest heat signature on this deck. Me. I did not turn around right away. Some old animal part of my brain told me that if I stayed perfectly still, whatever was behind that grating might decide I was not worth the effort. It was a foolish thought. I knew that even as I had it, the Vren had not survived as the most feared predator in known space by losing interest in things that moved, or things that did not move, or things that simply existed within reach of its senses. I forced myself to turn my head, slowly, the beam of my light sliding across the grating, until it landed on 2 eyes reflecting the glow back at me, like twin coins of pale fire. It was bigger than the containment specimen file had prepared me for. The images Talon had shown the crew weeks earlier, back when this had all felt like an academic exercise rather than a matter of survival, had not captured the sheer density of the thing, the way its long body seemed built entirely of coiled muscle beneath a hide the color of dried blood and ash. Its head was low, wedge-shaped, built for pushing through tight spaces, exactly like the one it was pressing against right now. I dropped the toolkit. I do not remember deciding to do that. My hands simply stopped holding it. The grating groaned. I turned and ran, and I heard the metal give way behind me with a shriek that echoed through the shaft, like the whole ship was tearing itself open. My light swung wildly with every stride, throwing broken shapes across the walls, and somewhere behind me, I heard the unmistakable sound of something powerful and low to the ground, closing the distance far faster than anything that size should have been able to move. I could hear it behind me now, close enough that each impact of its body against the narrow shaft walls sent a shudder through the metal beneath my hands. The passage bent sharply to the left just ahead, and I threw myself around the corner without slowing, scraping my elbow raw against the edge of a support strut, barely noticing the sting through the roar of my own pulse in my ears. For one brief moment, the shaft widened into a junction box large enough for me to stand upright, and I made the mistake of glancing back. It was closer than I expected. Its low, wedge-shaped head filled almost the entire width of the passage behind me, eyes catching what little light remained and throwing it back in a flat, patient glow that held none of the frantic energy I felt racing through my own body. It did not look desperate. It did not look angry. It looked, if anything, almost bored, the way a creature moves when it has never once needed to hurry to catch something it wanted. That single detail frightened me more than anything else that night. It was not hunting me with urgency. It was simply closing the distance at its own pace, certain of the outcome long before it arrived. I hit the end of the shaft and shoved through the access hatch into the main corridor, stumbling out onto the deck plating just as the alarm lights pulsed another warning overhead. I did not stop moving. I could not stop moving. Every instinct I had left was screaming the same single command. Do not let it touch you. I heard Draven Cole's voice shouting something from further down the corridor, and for one brief, desperate second, I thought I might actually make it to him, might actually reach cover before the thing behind me closed the gap. I did not make it. Something struck my leg from the side with the force of a falling support beam, and the corridor spun around me as I hit the floor hard enough to knock the wind from my chest a second time that night. I rolled onto my back out of pure reflex, and that was when I saw it fully for the first time, filling the width of the corridor, its jaw already opening in a way that felt less like an attack and more like an inevitability. I do not remember deciding to raise my arm. I only remember that it seemed to happen on its own, some last useless attempt at protecting the parts of myself that mattered most. The bite came fast, faster than fear, faster than thought. I felt teeth close around my forearm with a pressure that did not even register as pain at first, only as an impossible, crushing weight, and then the pain arrived all at once, sharp and burning and spreading, like something poured molten under my skin and set loose to travel wherever it pleased. I heard someone screaming. It took me a moment to understand the sound was coming from me. The predator released its grip almost as quickly as it had taken it, stepping back, its head tilting in a motion that looked, absurdly, almost like confusion. I did not have time to wonder why. The burning in my arm had already begun crawling toward my shoulder, and my vision was narrowing at the edges like the whole world was being swallowed by a slowly closing door. I heard Talon's voice calling my name from somewhere far away, followed by Draven Cole shouting orders I could no longer make sense of. The corridor lights blurred into long red streaks above me. 2 minutes, Talon had said. No nervous system survives longer than 2 minutes. I remember thinking, with a strange and distant calm that did not feel like it belonged to me, that at least it would be quick. My arm had gone numb up to the elbow. My vision blurred at the edges, the corridor lights smearing into long red streaks above me. Somewhere close by, I heard the Vren make a sound I had not heard from it before. A low, broken noise, nothing like the confident growl it had carried moments earlier. I turned my head, every motion costing more effort than it should have, and saw the creature stagger sideways into the corridor wall. Its powerful legs, the same legs that had carried it through solid metal grating like it was paper, buckled beneath it, as though the weight of its own body had suddenly become too much to bear. I did not understand what I was seeing. I barely understood that I was still conscious. The burning in my arm reached my shoulder, and the edges of the world folded inward, darker and darker, until there was nothing left to hold on to at all. The first thing I became aware of was sound, before anything else. A steady beeping rhythm, somewhere close to my ear, patient and unhurried, nothing like the alarms that had filled my last memory. The second thing I noticed was light, soft and white, nothing like the pulsing red of the corridor. The third thing I noticed was that I was breathing. I was alive. That fact alone took a long moment to settle into my mind, because it did not seem possible. I remembered the burning spreading up my arm. I remembered the darkness folding in around me like a curtain closing on a final act. I remembered thinking, with something close to peace, that this was simply how it ended. And yet here I was, blinking against a bright ceiling, my body aching in every joint but undeniably, stubbornly still functioning. "He is awake." The voice belonged to Talon Riche, and there was something in her tone I had never heard from her before, a kind of disbelief that did not fit the calm, measured way the Corvain usually spoke. I turned my head, slowly, every muscle protesting the movement, and saw her standing at the edge of what I now recognized as the ship's small medical bay, her feathers still raised along her neck the way they had been in the corridor. Except now, it did not look like alarm. It looked like something closer to shock. "Ethan," Captain Doss appeared at my other side, gripping the edge of the medical berth as though she needed something solid to hold on to. "Can you hear me? Can you understand what I am saying?" "Yes," I managed, though my voice came out as barely more than a rasp. My throat felt like sandpaper. "What happened?" Nobody answered right away, and the silence stretched long enough that I started to feel afraid all over again, though for a different reason this time. "What happened to it?" I asked instead, because some instinct told me that was the more important question. "The Vren. Is it still loose?" Draven Cole stepped into view then, and the look on his face was one I did not have a name for. It was not relief, not exactly, though there was relief buried somewhere inside it. It looked more like a man staring at something that broke every rule he had ever trusted to be true. "It is dead," he said. I stared at him, certain I had misheard. "It bit me," I said slowly. "I felt it. I felt the venom." "We know," Talon said. "We saw the mark on your arm. We saw you collapse. We were certain, all of us, that we were about to lose a member of this crew to something none of us could stop in time to help. And then the Vren collapsed as well, only seconds after you did, and it did not get back up. I tried to process that, and found I could not." "I do not understand," I said. "Neither do we," Captain Doss admitted. "That is the problem." She gestured to my arm, and for the first time I looked down at it myself. There was a bandage wrapped tightly around my forearm, and beneath it I could feel a dull, throbbing soreness, nothing like the searing agony I remembered from the corridor. The wound was real. The bite marks were unmistakable, 4 deep punctures where teeth the size of my fingers had closed around my skin. But I was alive to look at it. "How long was I out?" I asked. "Nearly 6 hours," Talon said. "Your vital signs dropped dangerously low within the first few minutes, exactly as every recorded case predicted they would. And then, roughly 90 seconds after the bite, something changed. Your heart rate stabilized. Your breathing evened out. It was as though your body simply decided to stop dying." I let that sink in, and it did not sink in easily. "And the Vren," I said. "You said it died at almost the same time." "We recovered the body from the corridor an hour ago," Draven Cole said. "Our medical scanners confirm it. Whatever killed it happened fast, and it happened from the inside. There is no trauma on the body consistent with any weapon we used, because we never fired a shot. Nobody had the chance." The room went quiet again, all 3 of them looking at me the way you might look at a puzzle piece that did not belong to the puzzle you thought you were assembling. "I did not do anything," I said, feeling suddenly and strangely defensive, as though I needed to clarify that I had not somehow fought off the single deadliest predator known to explored space with my bare hands. "It bit me. I fell. That is the entire story from where I was standing." "We know," Captain Doss said. "That is exactly what worries us." I spent the next several hours undergoing every scan the ship's medical bay was capable of running, most of it performed by Talon herself, her feathers slowly settling back into their usual smooth pattern, as the immediate shock wore into something closer to fierce scientific focus. She drew blood samples, checked my reflexes, measured my temperature every 20 minutes as though expecting some delayed collapse to still be waiting around a corner somewhere. "Your vitals are steady," she said eventually, reviewing a data pad with an expression I could not quite read. "Genuinely steady. Whatever should have happened to you did not happen, and I have no explanation for why, at least not yet." "Is there a chance it was a weaker bite?" I asked. "Maybe it did not release enough venom." "I considered that," she said. "But the puncture depth on your arm suggests a full bite, delivered with the same force recorded in every prior fatal encounter. If anything, the damage to the tissue around the wound suggests more venom entered your system than the historical average, not less." "Then how am I still here?" "I do not know," she admitted. And something about hearing a scientist say those 3 words out loud, plainly, without hiding behind theory or speculation, made the whole situation feel even stranger than it already did. Before I left the medical bay, Draven Cole lingered near the doorway a moment longer than the others, as though he wanted to say something further, and could not quite decide whether it was worth saying. I have served on ships for 19 years, he said eventually. I have seen what a Vrenbite does to a body in training simulations we ran precisely so no one would ever have to see it happen for real. I was already composing the message I would need to send to your family, Ethan. I want you to understand that. I had already decided how I was going to tell them. I did not know what to say to that, so I said nothing at all. I do not know what to do with the fact that I did not need to send it, he continued. I am not certain any of us do yet. He left without waiting for a response, and I sat alone in the medical bay for a while afterward, turning that conversation over in my mind, trying to imagine the version of that message he had already begun composing, and trying not to imagine it too clearly. Word of what happened spread through the small crew quickly, the way anything does on a ship where 11 people share every corridor and every meal. By the time I was cleared to leave the medical bay and walk unassisted back to my own quarters, I noticed the way people looked at me had already begun to shift. Where before I had been simply Ethan, the human engineer who fixed ducts and wiring nobody else wanted to deal with, now I was something else, something people were not quite sure how to categorize. I passed one of our navigation officers, a quiet Ashkar named Vel Marrow, in the corridor outside the mess hall, and he stopped walking entirely when he saw me, staring for a long moment before offering a stiff nod and continuing on his way without a word. I could not tell if it was fear or awe or some combination of both, and I was not sure which one I preferred. They are not used to this, Talon told me later, catching up to walk beside me as I made my way toward the observation deck, needing somewhere quiet to sit and simply think. For most species, the Vren represents an absolute, a line that cannot be crossed and survived. You crossed it. Nobody knows what to do with that information yet, including me. I did not choose to cross it, I said. It chose me. I understand that, she said, but understanding it does not change how it looks to everyone else on this ship, or how it will look to everyone who hears about it once we return to a station with a working communications relay. I stopped walking and turned to face her. You think this is going to spread? I think, she said carefully, that a story like this does not stay quiet for long, and I think you should prepare yourself for what it will mean once it does. Later that evening, unable to sleep, I wandered past the small conference room near the bridge and overheard Captain Doss speaking quietly with Draven Cole, their voices low, but not quite low enough to miss entirely through the half-open door. We could keep this internal, Draven Cole was saying. File it as an unexplained anomaly. Protect him from whatever attention this might bring. And if another ship encounters a Vren next month, or next year, with a human aboard who does not know what we now know, Captain Doss replied, and that human does not survive simply because we chose silence over disclosure, could you live with that decision, Draven? There was a long pause before he answered. No, he admitted, I could not. I stepped away from the door before either of them noticed me standing there, my chest tight with a feeling I could not fully name, something between gratitude and a strange, heavy responsibility I had never asked to carry. I did not have an answer for that. I simply nodded and continued toward the observation deck, my bandaged arm aching faintly with every step, my mind circling the same impossible question over and over, without landing anywhere close to an answer. Why was I still alive? The observation deck was empty when I arrived, a long curved window looking out over the endless dark, scattered with distant points of light, none of them close enough to feel like anything but background scenery. I sat down heavily in one of the reclined chairs positioned along the window and let my head fall back, staring up at the stars without really seeing them. I thought about the bite. I thought about the burning sensation climbing my arm, the way it had felt like fire poured directly into my veins, the certainty I had felt in that final moment, before the darkness took over, that I was not going to survive this. And yet somewhere in that darkness, something had changed, not just for me. For the Vren as well. I did not know it yet, sitting alone on that observation deck with my thoughts spinning in slow, useless circles. But the answer to that question was already inside me. It had been inside me the entire time, long before I ever stepped foot on the Halcyon Reach, long before I had ever heard the word Vren spoken in a hushed and fearful tone. It would take Talon and the ship's small medical team nearly 2 full days to find it, and when they finally did, it would not just explain why I was alive. It would change the way every species aboard that ship, and eventually every species who heard the story, looked at humanity from that point forward. Talon found me on the second day, still sitting near the observation deck, though I had moved seats twice trying to find a position that did not put pressure on my healing arm. She was carrying a datapad against her chest with both hands, the way someone carries something they are not entirely sure how to present. "I need you to come to the lab," she said. "I think I understand what happened. I do not think you are going to believe it easily, but I need you to hear it anyway." I followed her down 2 decks to the small research lab tucked behind the medical bay, a space usually reserved for cataloging specimens and running analysis on samples collected during survey missions. The Vren's body lay under a sterile covering on one of the examination tables, and beside it, displayed across 2 separate monitors, were readouts I did not fully understand, filled with molecular structures and chemical breakdowns that meant nothing to me at a glance. "Sit down," Talon said, gesturing to a stool near the counter. "This will take some explaining." I sat. "When I first drew your blood after the incident," she began, "I ran the standard toxicology screen, expecting to find remnants of the venom still active in your system, degrading slowly the way most biological toxins do. Instead, I found something else. Traces of the venom were present, yes, but in far smaller concentrations than I expected, and more strangely, the venom itself appeared to have been broken down at a rate no species database I have access to has ever recorded." "Broken down by what?" I asked. "By you," she said simply. "By something already present in your bloodstream." She tapped the datapad, and one of the monitors shifted to display a comparison chart. 2 chemical structures side by side, one labeled with a designation I could not pronounce, and the other simply marked human. Every predator species we have catalogued across explored space, ourselves included, carries some form of natural resistance, built up over evolutionary history, against the toxins and venoms common to its own environment, she continued. The Vren evolved on Kessa Prime, a world with an ecosystem entirely separate from any other explored system. Nothing that lives there shares any evolutionary history with anything that lives anywhere else. Its venom is uniquely suited to overwhelm nervous systems built along familiar patterns, patterns shared by nearly every known form of complex life we have encountered. "But not mine," I said slowly, starting to understand where this was heading. "Not entirely, no," Talon said. "Humans carry a compound in your blood, something related to iron transport and immune response, that exists in a form none of us have seen before. It is common enough among your species that your own medical science barely studies it, because to you it does no harm at all. It simply exists as part of what you are." And it hurt the Vren. "It did more than hurt it," she said. "When the venom entered your bloodstream, that compound reacted with it in a way that should not have been possible, according to every model we have. Instead of the venom shutting down your nervous system the way it always has with every other species, your blood began breaking the toxin apart almost immediately, and in doing so, it created a secondary compound, a byproduct of that reaction, that traveled back through the wound and into the predator's own system." I stared at her. "You are telling me my blood poisoned it back. I am telling you that when the Vren bit you, it delivered a toxin built to kill nearly anything in known space, and your body responded by manufacturing something that killed it instead," she said. "It was not a fight it lost because you were stronger, or faster, or more skilled. It lost because the one thing it relied on completely, the one weapon that has never failed in recorded history, encountered a biology it had never once been designed to face." "Why has nobody ever noticed this before?" I asked. "Humans have been part of the wider galaxy for years now. Surely someone has studied our blood before." "Studied, yes," Talon said. "But there was never a reason to test it against Vren venom specifically, because no human had ever been bitten and survived long enough to provide a sample worth testing. Every prior record of a Vren encounter, across every species catalogued, ended in a body being recovered, not a patient in a medical bay answering questions. You are the first data point of your kind that has ever existed. There was nothing to compare it against until 3 days ago. That is a strange thing to be, I said. The first data point. It is an important thing to be, she corrected gently. Science advances by exception, Ethan, not by pattern. Every rule anyone has ever written about the universe was eventually broken by something nobody expected. You are simply the exception that happened to survive long enough to be recorded. The lab fell quiet for a long moment while I tried to absorb what she was telling me. So it is not really about me, I said eventually. It could have been any human standing there instead. That is precisely correct, Talon said, and there was something almost reluctant in the way she said it, as though the idea unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. This was not a matter of your particular strength or resilience, Ethan. This is simply what your species is. Every human carries this same compound. Every human who might ever be bitten by a Vren would very likely produce the same result. I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. That is either the best news I have ever heard, I said, or the most terrifying. Perhaps both, Talon agreed. Draven Cole arrived partway through the explanation, having been summoned by Talon before I even reached the lab, and he listened to the rest of it standing near the doorway with his arms folded, his expression unreadable in the way only an Ashkar's could be. You understand what this means, beyond your own survival, he said once Talon had finished. I am not sure I do, I admitted. The Vren is the reason entire systems near Kessa Prime remain unclaimed, he said. Mining operations abandoned. Research stations evacuated, trade routes rerouted at enormous cost for decades because no species that attempted to establish a presence there could survive an encounter with even a single specimen. Entire fleets have avoided that region rather than risk losing personnel to something with no known defense. And now there is a defense, I said, understanding beginning to settle in, alongside a strange, uncomfortable weight. Humans. Not a defense exactly, Talon corrected gently. You did not fight it off. You survived it, by simple accident of biology, and in surviving it, you killed it in return. But the distinction may not matter to anyone who hears this story. What will matter is the outcome. A species considered soft by most of galactic society, a species that has only recently begun expanding beyond its home system, appears to be biologically resistant to the single most feared predator known to exist. I thought about all the quiet comments I had overheard over the months I had served aboard the Halcyon Reach. Comments about human fragility, human inexperience, the assumption held by more established species that we were simply not built for the more dangerous corners of explored space. I thought about Velmero's stunned, silent stare in the corridor. People are not going to see this as an accident, I said quietly, are they? No, Draven Cole said. They are not. Captain Doss joined us shortly after, having reviewed Talon's full report on her own datapad, and she looked at me with an expression I had not seen from her before, something between concern and calculation. We are still 4 days from the nearest station, with a communications relay strong enough to send a full report, she said. That gives us time to decide exactly how this is documented, and how it is shared, before it leaves our hands entirely. You think it should be kept quiet, I said. I think, she said carefully, that once this leaves this ship, it stops being your story, Ethan. It stops being our story. It becomes something else, something other species will use, misuse, and reshape into whatever version serves them best. Some will see it as an opportunity, others may see it as a threat that needs to be addressed before it grows any larger. You mean before humans grow more confident, I said. She did not answer that directly, which was answer enough. Talon spent the following 2 days running further tests, partly to confirm her initial findings and partly, I suspected, because the implications of what she had found unsettled her enough that she needed to be absolutely certain before committing it to any official record. She isolated the compound in my blood, cross-referenced it against medical archives from human colonies going back decades, and found the same pattern present in every single sample, with only minor variation between individuals. It is not rare, she told me during one of these sessions, drawing another small blood sample from my uninjured arm while I sat on the edge of the medical berth. It is not some unusual mutation unique to you. It is simply part of what your species is, present in every human regardless of origin, age, or background. Which means, functionally speaking, any one of your kind who found themselves in the position you were in 3 days ago would very likely have survived, and very likely have caused the same result in the Vren that bit them. That is a strange thing to carry around without knowing it, I said. Most defining traits are, she replied. Species rarely understand what makes them exceptional from the inside. It usually takes someone else, or something else, encountering that trait for the first time to reveal it. I thought about that for a long while after she left the lab, sitting alone with the quiet hum of the ship's systems around me, and for the first time since the bite, the fear that had been sitting heavy in my chest since the moment I woke up in the medical bay began to loosen its grip, replaced slowly by something else entirely. Not pride, exactly. Not yet. Something closer to a question I had never thought to ask before boarding this ship. A question about what else might be true about my species, that nobody, including us, had ever had reason to discover. By the time the Halcyon Reach came within range of the communications relay 4 days later, Captain Doss had made her decision. The full report would be sent, unfiltered, exactly as Talon had documented it, along with a formal request for further study into the compound, now informally being referred to among the crew simply as the Marsh Factor, a name I had not asked for and was not entirely sure I wanted, but one that seemed determined to follow me regardless. None of us fully understood, in that quiet moment before the transmission was sent, just how far and how fast that report was about to travel, or what it would come to mean for a species that had, until that moment, been considered little more than a curious newcomer among the stars. The transmission left our ship on a quiet afternoon that felt, at the time, no different from any other. There was no ceremony to it, no dramatic countdown, just Captain Doss authorizing the send, and a small confirmation light blinking green on the communications console. I remember standing beside her when it happened, my bandaged arm finally free of its wrapping, the wound beneath it healed into 4 small pale scars that would stay with me for the rest of my life. I did not expect much to happen right away. Reports like that, I assumed, would sit in some scientific archive for months before anyone outside a small circle of researchers ever noticed them. I was wrong. Within a single day of reaching the relay station, our report had already been copied, forwarded, and picked apart by 3 separate research institutes eager to verify its claims before anyone else could. Within a week, it had reached beyond scientific circles entirely, passed along through trade networks and military channels alike, each retelling adding its own small exaggeration, the way any good story tends to grow the further it travels from its source. By the time we docked at a proper station 2 months later for resupply and repairs, I discovered that the story had outpaced us entirely. I remember walking through the station's crowded main concourse, still adjusting to solid ground after months aboard ship, when a group of Ashkar dock workers stopped what they were doing to stare at me. One of them, older, with plating scarred from what looked like decades of hard labor, approached slowly, studying my face like he was trying to match it against something he had only heard described secondhand. "You are the human," he said. It was not really a question. "I am a human," I said carefully. "There are quite a few of us." "The one who killed a Vren," he clarified, and I understood then that the story had already reshaped itself somewhere along its journey, sharpened into something simpler and more dramatic than the truth. "It was not exactly like that," I said. "That is not what I heard," he replied, and walked away before I could explain further, already turning to tell his companions something in a language I did not understand, though I could guess well enough at the shape of it from the way they all turned to look at me again. A young Corvain trainee stopped me near the station's transit terminal a few days later, her feathers bright with the kind of nervous energy that reminded me faintly of Talon during our first tense hours aboard the Halcyon Reach. She asked, with genuine and disarming honesty, whether it was true that I had strangled the creature with my bare hands before it could bite a second time. I told her, as gently as I could, that the truth was far less impressive than that I had simply fallen, and survived, and that the Vren had done all the dying entirely on its own, without any help from me at all. She looked faintly disappointed, though she thanked me for my honesty before hurrying off to wherever she had been headed. I watched her go, and found myself smiling despite everything, because it occurred to me that even the disappointing version of the truth was, in its own strange way, more remarkable than the myth people wanted instead. I quickly learned that correcting the story rarely worked. People wanted the version where a human faced down the galaxy's deadliest predator and won through sheer will. not the messier, quieter truth about biology and accident and blind luck. I tried, in the early weeks, to explain the real sequence of events to anyone who asked. The confusion, the fear, the fact that I had simply been bitten and survived rather than fought and triumphed. Most listened politely, and then repeated the more exciting version anyway the next time they told it to someone else. Talon found this endlessly frustrating on my behalf, though she also admitted, during one quiet evening back aboard the Halcyon Reach, that the exaggeration was probably inevitable. Species remember stories, not reports, she told me, the two of us sharing a rare quiet meal in the mostly empty mess hall. A report explains what happened. A story explains what it means. And the meaning people have taken from this, whether it is precisely accurate or not, is that humans are no longer something to be underestimated. I did not do anything special, I said, for what felt like the 100th time since the incident. You keep saying that, she replied, as though it changes how the rest of the galaxy chooses to see it. It does not, Ethan. Meaning rarely cares about accuracy. It only cares about impact. I thought about that a great deal in the months that followed, as further studies confirmed exactly what Talon had first discovered in that small ship laboratory. Independent researchers, eager to verify or disprove the claim, conducted their own controlled studies using preserved Vren venom samples against human blood, donated voluntarily by colonists, eager to be part of what was quickly becoming one of the more talked-about discoveries in recent memory. Every single test produced the same result. The compound was not unique to me. It was simply human, present across the species without exception, an accident of evolutionary history that had never mattered until the day it collided, quite literally, with the one creature it was uniquely equipped to defeat. The practical consequences arrived faster than any of us expected. Within a year, mining consortiums that had abandoned operations near Kessa Prime decades earlier began quietly reopening negotiations, this time with human crews specifically requested for any position that might involve contact with local wildlife. Insurance costs for expeditions into that region dropped for the first time in living memory. Species that had once viewed human involvement in dangerous frontier work as an unnecessary liability began, slowly and sometimes reluctantly, to reconsider. I received, somewhat to my disbelief, an invitation roughly 8 months later to speak before a small gathering of xenobiologists on a research station orbiting a world I had never heard of before that day. I accepted mostly out of curiosity, and partly because Talon insisted the invitation was too significant to decline gracefully. Standing in front of that room, filled with researchers from at least 6 different species, all of them waiting to hear directly from the person at the center of a story that had already traveled further and faster than I ever could have imagined, I found myself doing something I had not expected. I told them the truth, the entire truth, without embellishment. I told them about the fear in that corridor, the certainty I had felt that I was about to die, the confusion in the moments after I woke up alive, when nothing about the situation made any sense to me at all. I told them I was not brave. I told them I had simply been unlucky enough to be bitten, and lucky enough to be human when it happened. A few of them seemed disappointed by how ordinary the truth sounded compared to the version that had reached them. But most of them, I noticed, seemed to lean forward rather than back as I spoke, as though the plain, unremarkable honesty of it made the discovery somehow more unsettling rather than less. Because if this was simply an accident, simply a biological trait none of us had ever needed to test before, then the obvious question followed close behind. What else about humanity remained undiscovered, waiting quietly inside blood and bone for the right dangerous encounter to reveal it? Nobody in that room had an answer. Neither did I. Captain Doss retired from active service roughly 2 years after the incident, settling on a quiet colony world, far from any of the trade routes we had once traveled together, though she still sent the occasional message checking in on how I was adjusting to a reputation I had never asked for, and still was not entirely sure I deserved. Draven Cole remained aboard the Halcyon Reach, though I noticed he treated the handful of human crew who rotated through afterward with a quiet, careful respect he had not extended before, the kind of respect given to something you no longer fully understand but have learned not to underestimate. I left the Halcyon Reach roughly a year after the incident, not because I wanted to escape the reputation that followed me, but because a new opportunity had opened that I could not have imagined applying for before any of this happened. A joint survey mission, staffed by 3 different species, was being organized to reassess the systems surrounding Kessa Prime, this time with human specialists included by explicit request, rather than tolerated as an afterthought. I applied without much confidence, certain that whatever attention the story had brought me would fade the moment someone more experienced stepped forward instead. I was wrong about that as well. Vel Marrow, the quiet Ashkar navigator who had once stared at me in stunned silence in a corridor of the Halcyon Reach, was assigned to that same survey team, and on our first evening aboard the new vessel, he sought me out in the mess hall, sitting across from me without waiting to be invited. "I owe you an apology," he said, without preamble. "For what?" I asked, genuinely unsure what he meant. "For how I looked at you afterward," he said. "I did not know how to see you as simply a colleague anymore. I saw you as something else, something I did not have a category for. I think many of us made that mistake." "It is an easy mistake to make," I said. "I was not sure how to see myself either, for a while." "And now?" he asked. "Now I try to just be an engineer who happens to know something strange about his own blood," I said. "Most days, that is enough." He nodded slowly, seeming to consider that, and then, in a gesture I had not expected from someone as reserved as him, extended a plated hand across the table. I shook it, and something about that small, ordinary exchange settled a weight in my chest that had been sitting there, quietly, since long before I ever understood it was there at all. Talon continued her research long after the initial discovery, eventually publishing a full study on what the scientific community had, somewhat to my ongoing embarrassment, permanently adopted as the Marsh factor. She sent me a copy when it was finished, along with a short personal note that I kept long after most other records of that time had faded from memory. It read simply, "The deadliest predator in known space did not lose to strength, or skill, or courage. It lost to something quieter and far more unsettling. An accident of biology nobody thought to look for until it was already too late to matter." Perhaps that is the more important lesson buried inside this story. The galaxy has spent generations measuring danger by claws, and venom, and size. It may be time to start measuring it by what lies unseen beneath the surface instead. Years later, long after the initial excitement around the discovery had settled into something closer to accepted fact, I returned briefly to the very station where I had first heard someone call me the human, back when the story was still young and reshaping itself daily. The dock worker who had approached me that day was gone, retired or moved on, but I found myself standing in that same crowded concourse regardless, watching new arrivals move through it the way I once had, uncertain and small against the size of everything around them. A young human woman, barely more than a new recruit, judging by the crispness of her uniform, recognized me from across the terminal and hesitated before approaching, clearly unsure whether it was appropriate to interrupt. "I read about you in training," she said. "They use your case now to teach new recruits about the Marsh factor before anyone gets assigned to frontier routes." "I hope they use the accurate version," I said, smiling despite myself. "Mostly," she said, though I heard at least 3 different versions before I found the official report. "That sounds about right," I said. She lingered a moment longer, and then asked the question I had come to expect from almost everyone who approached me over the years. "Were you scared when it happened?" I thought about the corridor, the burning climbing my arm, the certainty that I would not survive the next 60 seconds. "More scared than I have ever been before or since," I said honestly. There was nothing brave about it. I did not choose any of what happened. It simply happened to me, and I happened to survive it. "That is not the version people tell," she said. "No," I agreed, "but it is the true one, and I have found, over enough time, that the true version tends to matter more than people expect, even if it takes them longer to want to hear it." I still think about that corridor sometimes, late at night when the ship I now serve aboard, a different vessel with a different crew, grows quiet around me. I think about the burning in my arm, the darkness closing in, the strange calm that settled over me in what I was certain would be my final moment. I do not think about it with fear anymore. I think about it as the moment the rest of the galaxy learned something about my species that we ourselves had never bothered to discover, simply because we had never needed to. Somewhere out among the stars, other predators remain, other dangers wait, in ecosystems no human has yet set foot upon, and I find myself wondering, quietly and without any real fear attached to the thought. What else might be hiding inside us, waiting patiently for its own turn to be revealed? The galaxy called the Vren its deadliest predator for good reason. It had earned that reputation over generations of encounters that always ended the same way. Until the day it did not. And I was simply the ordinary, unremarkable person who happened to be standing there when it found out why.